Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Monday, May 26th, Jerusalem Day, day 598 of the war. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
We learned last night that the IDF intends to seize and hold some 75% of the Gaza Strip within 2 months. Manny will explain how this operation is planned to be carried out. We'll also hear about humanitarian aid efforts that are meant to begin today and where the population is meant to go as the fighting is intensified. We'll also learn about the results of the IDF's probe into the failures leading up to and on October 7th in Kibbutz Kissufim. All of this and more when we're back.
Jews have to learn to walk and chew gum at the same time. Thank you, Mr. President, for Jerusalem. No, thank you for banning Arabs. His message on anti-Semitism is a good message. Trump is saying all the right things, and he may even be doing the right things, but for the wrong reasons. It's a dilemma for us, but I think we still have to stand up for the institutions, for due process, even if the wrong things that he's doing help us in the long term.
I just don't see how they help us at all, because I think in the long
run... There needs to be consequences. You can go out, you can march with a Palestinian flag, God bless you. That's fine. But if you use that flag to stop a Jewish students to go to class or beat them up, that's not freedom of speech. There needs to be consequences.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. So currently the IDF holds about 40% of the Gaza Strip, and it stated last night that it intends to take about 75% within 2 months. That's a doubling of the territory. So obviously there are Gazans who are living in this territory, and I want to start the program by explaining the process of the evacuation orders, how they're carried out, how much time people are given, etc., etc. So, Manny, talk us through this process of evacuation orders. First of all, how are they delivered?
So, since the beginning of the war, the army has had this online. It's a website basically that has this map that it's split into various blocks. More than I think like 2,000 or so blocks in Gaza, every small zone. And the army warned at the beginning of the war to sort of know which block you're in, and then when an evacuation order is issued, then you'll know where to go, even if you don't have internet access. But generally, the army issues these orders via Twitter or X today. The army's Arabic language spokesperson puts out a message. But there are cases where the army drops leaflets in Gaza showing which areas are now under evacuation. Text messages, phone calls sometimes, especially if we're talking about a hospital. If it's in an area that needs to be evacuated, then the army will call up the hospital and explain to them that they need to evacuate and leave by a certain time. These evacuation orders, they don't really expire. Sometimes they're issued in a small area because a rocket was launched from that area and then the army wants to strike there. So they issue a warning, and then a few hours later a strike is carried out. But there are other areas which are, I would say, more permanent evacuation warnings. So the army's buffer zone along the entire border of Gaza, the entire Rafah area, which was ordered to evacuate in late March, those are more permanent. And if you look at any of the new evacuation orders that the army gives out, they list the new zones that are ordered to be evacuated, but the more permanent orders, like the buffer zone and Rafah, remain still highlighted, and they say that this is an area that you can't enter and it's prohibited to be in because it's a combat zone. So we're now seeing that basically on the IDF's maps now that a lot of the Gaza Strip is under this sort of permanent evacuation order.
And so if a family was living in the Rafah area, it should not be living there according to the idea of the IDF, meaning the IDF has ordered this family or any kind of civilian to be leaving this area, but yet we're seeing so many cases in which people are just not obeying these orders. Does the IDF take that into account, do you think, when it's performing strikes?
It does, definitely. I mean, it doesn't just issue the evacuation order and then carry out a strike. It also monitors to see if people are leaving the area, and it's always monitoring the population in Gaza, sort of where they are at any given time. The estimates are not great, to be honest, and I've seen the army give estimates and they've been very wrong before about them, but they do monitor this, and they say they've been getting better at actually telling how many people are in each area. For example, now in Gaza City there's an estimated 1 million Palestinians right now, but that number could be off. It could be more than 1 million, it could be less than 1 million. It's all the various ways that Israel has of actually detecting it. But in the Rafah area for now, the army's been saying for several weeks that there are no civilians remaining there because it had ordered it to evacuate. It didn't monitor any civilians in the area. It didn't see any civilians in the area during the fighting there, and therefore it considers it evacuated, and therefore it can operate with more freedom because they assume there's no risk of harming civilians.
And yet, obviously, we're seeing quite the opposite, that civilians are being harmed in certain areas. It's a little confusing to me as well, Manny, because we've discussed the humanitarian aid effort. And what we've talked about is that there will be 4, main stations for distribution. And many of these are in the Rafah area. So on the one hand, we're saying that the civilians should not be there. But on the other hand, the main aid will be distributed from there, including, I believe, starting from today, despite, of course, the resignation of the head of the Humanitarian Gaza Foundation, Jake Wood. He resigned yesterday, saying that implementation of this mechanism was impossible. So let's talk about, where are the people supposed to be at this point in Rafah, outside of Rafah? What's happening here?
So the army, when it launches its more expanded Gaza offensive that it talked about yesterday, it will see, and right now the situation is almost that, basically, where there are about 1 million Palestinians in Gaza City. There's around 700,000 in the Mawasi area, which is on the Strip's southern coast. It's where Israel used to have this humanitarian zone. It's now going to be called something like a safer zone, they're going to call it. Those 700,000, up until about a few days ago, a lot of them were actually in Khan Yunis, but they've actually moved because of the IDF's evacuation warning. They've moved from Khan Yunis into the Mawasi area. And then there are around 300 to 350,000 or more in central Gaza, in the Nusayrat and Deir Balach area. So that's where Palestinians currently are, and that's where they will also be when the army captures 75% of Gaza. Now, there will be, or there already is, an established route for Palestinians to go from Mawasi to the distribution hubs in Rafah, around in the Morag corridor area. So it's not that far, but civilians will go and collect their aid and then head back to Mawasi afterwards. So no one's going to be residing in those areas. It'll only be the army there and the distribution hubs there, and whatever activity the army's carrying out. And there's going to be basically a set route for Palestinians to go and collect the aid. So 3 of the distribution sites are in the Rafah area, in the Morag corridor area, and then 1 is in the Netzarim corridor. So the one in the north of Gaza will serve those in central Gaza and possibly those in Gaza City. Although, the math doesn't really add up if there's only 1 for 1 million people in Gaza City. I think the army hopes that the Palestinians in Gaza City will head south to southern Gaza, where there's more accessibility to aid, rather than the 1 site in North Gaza. And according to the IDF estimates, each aid distribution site can feed around 300,000 people per week, which, if you, of course, do the math, that does not get to 2 million of Gaza's population. It's quite a lot less than that. So in the meantime, aid trucks are still entering in Gaza the old way, especially those carrying supplies for hospitals and the flour for bakeries. That sort of method of entering aid will still continue, because just this system alone right now is not enough to feed the entire Gaza population.
But as I understand it, this is the pilot program in a way, these 4 centers, and the idea is to create more of these centers in order to feed the population. Is that what you're hearing as well, Manny?
I think the army wants to see most of the population head south, and that's what the defense minister said previously, that they want the Gaza population in the south of the Strip so that Israel can clear the rest of the north. And then ramp up the efforts with these distribution sites. I'm not sure they're going to build more distribution sites, but rather make them more efficient. Over time, 300,000, the ones in Rafah do serve the number of people that are in the Rafah area or the Mawasi area, for instance. But once the 1 million Palestinians from North Gaza do eventually move to the south, then they will need to ramp up this mechanism and make it more effective and more efficient.
Okay, so what we heard yesterday is a bit of a shift in strategy from the IDF. That's what I'm hearing, at least, that instead of targeting Hamas terrorists specifically only, basically, now the strategy is to seize and hold the territory. As I said at the top of the program, right now, Israel holds around 40% of the Gaza Strip, and the goal within 2 months is to basically double that. Manny, are you seeing that this is actually possible?
I think it's possible. I don't doubt that the army can capture and hold that amount of territory. I mean, they've proven it during the war. They've managed to capture massive amounts of territory in Gaza without that much, I would say, resistance from Hamas. I don't think that's the challenge. So I think within 2 months they'll be able to capture this sort of land, and the army said that it will raise basically the vast majority of buildings there, all the Hamas infrastructure there, and hold the territory not permanently, but for the foreseeable future. And I think that's the main difference is that previously Israel would go in, kill Hamas operatives, destroy infrastructure, and then withdraw afterwards, and then Hamas would regain control of the areas. And I think Israel's realized that killing Hamas members is not really going to end the war because they keep recruiting more people. They still have the land, the territory that they can regroup in and build more infrastructure and weapons, etc. So the idea is to go for the infrastructure, to go for the territory, to prevent them from regrouping and rearming and recruiting more and more people. And hopefully that will break Hamas is the sort of idea here. So it's not like Israel's not going to be killing Hamas terrorists, but the focus will be more on the territory and on the infrastructure. And speaking of infrastructure, the tunnels, of course, the army estimates that Hamas had built around 900 kilometers worth of tunnels in Gaza. And as we've previously mentioned on the podcast, only 25% has been destroyed so far in the war. So a lot of the focus will be on destroying the remaining Hamas tunnels. It's just a matter of getting to them and destroying them. It takes a very long time to actually locate the exact route, and even sometimes troops will find one entrance and then discover that the tunnel's much more extensive than they previously thought. I mean, I recently saw a case of the army. They found a tunnel that they destroyed. They thought they destroyed it, but it turns out there was another tunnel beneath that tunnel. So sort of two stories of tunnels, and they didn't know there was another one underneath it. So it's such a long process, and it takes so long to actually find them and destroy them. So that'll be, I don't think that's a short-term thing. Capturing the land will be short-term, but destroying all that infrastructure may take maybe even years to do.
And of course, you say tunnels, and everyone automatically thinks about the hostages. There are apparently some 20 that are considered still alive in the Gaza Strip. And this program that we're laying out, this plan to seize and hold the territory and destroy the tunnels, obviously is life-threatening for these hostages. What did you hear at the briefing about this?
So the army is well aware that this operation endangers the hostages. Any operation in Gaza endangers the hostages, but it is taking them into account and not operating in areas where it knows hostages are, especially those being held in tunnels. Of course, there have been cases where hostages have been killed or harmed because of IDF actions directly even, but it was cases where the army didn't have enough intelligence or didn't know that the hostages were held in those areas. And there are areas in Gaza where the army has avoided operating in because it knows hostages are being held there. For example, central Gaza, the Nuseirat and Deir al-Balach area, Nuseirat being the area where 4 hostages were actually rescued in an IDF operation last summer. The army hasn't carried out ground operations there because they know hostages are being held there and it would risk their lives. So this new offensive, capturing 75%, is aimed at only at areas where it knows are, I would say, safer to operate in without risking the lives of the Israeli hostages being held by Hamas. Of course, 20 of them still alive.
And of course, the hostages are being held alongside usually some of the leadership of the Hamas terror organization. So it is a very, very tricky situation here. We're going to go to a short break.
What surprised you the most discovering about Jewish life in the United States?
I think it's the pride. I think I was envy of that pride. Just being proud, being a proud Jew. It's something that I never even contemplated. I was just an Israeli. I think the fact that in Israel we have all sort of sectors in society, you kind of grow up with your kind. I hate that. The fact that I don't know a lot about my Jewish life, and I need to go abroad just to understand that. It's something so messed up, and how we grew up here. It's just, I think, once it got political to be Jewish in Israel, it made me kind of push away from that. Once I got to LA, once I got just being with my daughters abroad, just understanding what we are, my heritage, where we come from, our story, our values. It took me a long time. It took me a long time to get there.
And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Manny, you have been writing up the briefings that have been delivered into the probes of the failures that led to October 7th and the failures on October 7th from the IDF, meaning this is not a civil probe. This is the IDF's probe into the 40 battles that took place that day. And most recently, we published on Kibbutz Kissufim. There was a lot of loss of life at Kibbutz Kissufim, both from the military and the civilians. And of course, I believe only one hostage was taken, later returned dead from Gaza. Let's talk about, let's start with the successes of Kibbutz Kissufim, because obviously it was a very dark day. But more than any other probe that I've read of yours, it actually appears that things kind of went as they should have in terms of the military's operation. Would you agree with that?
I would agree. I think it's one of the rare cases where the troops stationed that morning, there are a few communities like this, where the troops stationed on the border rushed to defend the community. And their operations there, of course, they weren't enough forces. They didn't know exactly how to fight off a terrorist inside an Israeli community. But the actions that they took, along with the Kibbutz's civil defense squad, the local security team, did manage to disrupt Hamas's attack, and it basically prevented Hamas from actually rampaging throughout the entire community. Hamas attacked the northern and southern sections of the community, but they didn't manage to actually meet in the middle, these two groups of terrorists, and go throughout the whole community. And the fighting by the forces did actually prevent further harm. Of course, 9 Israeli civilians and 6 foreign workers were murdered in the kibbutz, which is terrible, of course, but the probe really shows that it could have been much, much worse. And really highlighting this is that 27 IDF soldiers were killed during the fighting there, inside the kibbutz and at the nearby Kissufim army post, and 1 member of the local security team was also killed during the fighting.
Right. That is a large loss of life from the military side, larger, I think, than we've seen in most of the other probes, aside from, of course, the army outposts or bases themselves. So take us through a little bit of the timeline of the attack on Kissufim.
So I'll start with the army base itself, the Kissufim post. So as Hamas launched its initial barrage of more than 1,000 rockets, troops were deployed to the Gaza border, and they exchanged fire with terrorists who were trying to infiltrate. And they did manage to actually kill quite a few of them, trying to breach into Israel, which of course also prevented many more of them from actually reaching the kibbutz. One team, as they, after they were fighting for several hours, they headed back to the base to restock on ammunition. And as they arrived at the base, a mortar hit them and killed 2 soldiers. The troops who were at the post, a lot of them actually headed to the kibbutz. The kibbutzes and the post are basically adjacent to each other. So as the terrorists were infiltrating into the kibbutz, the soldiers actually were already there to try and defend. But the post as well, the army base, was also coming under attack. And there were several major battles both at the entrance to the kibbutz, and the terrorists actually managed to get in a little bit. There was one soldier, Tomer Nagar, who was armed with a machine gun, a Negev machine gun, and he basically for 25 minutes just shot down a large number of terrorists by himself before he was also killed. He ran out of ammunition, of course. And inside the base, there was a major battle also at the bomb shelter. There was an officer who exchanged fire while defending the bomb shelter. There were troops hiding inside. And the terrorists were throwing grenades into the shelter, and he fought back. So this officer, Raz Peretz, was killed, and 6 other troops were also killed during this fighting. And only in the afternoon did backup troops actually arrive to the base, and they cleaned up basically the remaining terrorists and rescued forces who were there was surveillance soldiers who were trying to hide in the area as well. And then meanwhile, there's also this attack on the kibbutz itself, on Kissufim itself. So these Golani soldiers who were ordered basically to reach the kibbutz from the post, they arrived right as the terrorists were coming into the kibbutz. They exchanged fire with them. They managed to kill several of them. And the terrorists were sort of going through some of the homes. They abducted and murdered Shlomo Mansour, who's, of course, his body was returned in the recent hostage deal. And they also went into the home of the local security officer, the coordinator, and they remained in his home for actually most of the day. In the south of the kibbutz, there were local security officers who were engaging the terrorists, along with an off-duty IDF soldier also fighting them. But the main thing is that in both the north of the kibbutz and the south of the kibbutz, troops were fighting against the terrorists and basically prevented them from going to the center of the kibbutz and where most of the residents actually live. And backup troops only arrived by 1 p.m. And when they did, they discovered the bodies of several murdered civilians and soldiers who were killed in the battle. And in the afternoon, there was one major battle that took place. There's sort of a junction between the kibbutz and the base. So sort of an intersection there, and troops basically would reach that area after hearing that Hamas members were there. They were basically ambushed by the terrorists there. 5 soldiers were killed. That was one of the main incidents. And then a little later, the same forces, those that remains, they went to the home of the local security officer where the terrorists were basically holed up inside his home. And during this exchange of fire, a soldier was killed and one member of the local security team, Sarah Margolis, was killed in this. And then later in the day, I think like 3:30, additional soldiers came to basically help clear the kibbutz. One soldier was killed during an exchange of fire in that area. And what you'll basically see in the probe is that the terrorists remained in the kibbutz for many days. It was only on October 12th that the last terrorist was actually killed in the kibbutz. So it took a very long time for the army to actually clear it. And the probe notes that the techniques that the troops used to clear the kibbutz were not really what they should have done. It took them much longer than it should have. I'll note that one more incident that was noted in the probe is that on October 8th, sort of the night after, was around 1:30 in the morning, the troops were trying to flush out terrorists from a building, from a home, the Godot family home. And basically the troops rushed into the building at one point after hearing noises coming in there. They didn't realize that civilians were still in the home because they were coming under fire by terrorists from the home. And they opened fire on the bomb shelter, on the bomb safe room's door, and it killed Tom Godot, the father of the family. His wife and children, his daughters, fled out the bomb safe's window because they thought the terrorists were in the home. And they reached the troops outside, and then the terrorists were actually later located in an adjacent home. The terrorists apparently had fled out some other direction, and they were, of course, also eventually killed. And there was one more incident, if I'll note. On October 9th, the manager of the kibbutz dairy set out for Kissufim to tend to the cows, and there were a group of terrorists actually hiding in the dairy area in the cow shed there, and he was also killed, and troops also later reached the area and eliminated those terrorists. So a lot of incidents over a long period of time. I think maybe even the longest battle that took place in a single kibbutz during the whole onslaught. But the troops were there the whole time. They were engaging the terrorists the whole time. So it really could have been much, much worse for the civilians living there.
Manny, as we end our program, you are not a prophet, and obviously the IDF Chief of Staff is not telling you his timeline, but we have been poised to begin this operation, this massive rollout of ground forces in the Gaza Strip for, it feels like forever, but probably at least a week, if not 2. And I wonder, do you have any kind of expectation, you yourself, obviously, again, nobody is whispering secrets into your ear. Do you yourself have any kind of expectation when it will actually roll out?
So you talk about the major offensive, the major ground operation. Soon is what I've been told. Within the next week, maybe. It's really hard to say, but the army says that within 2 months after launching it, it will complete it. I think a bigger question is what happens after that. What does the army do after it's captured 75% of Gaza and clears Hamas infrastructure and everything? So is that going to be years? Is it going to be months? Are we going to reach a hostage deal? It's completely unknown, I think. There's no real way of telling, but this major ground offensive, from what I'm hearing, as right now, the hostage talks are sort of ongoing. They seem like they've stalled, but there's some sort of reports of developments. But what I'm hearing is that if there are no developments and Israel says, okay, that's it, the hostage talks are over, then the army launches this operation. So Israel, it's not really up to the army, it's up to the political level to tell the army when to go. The army's ready, it's in its positions, it's really poised to activate all the forces. But it really depends on where the hostage negotiations actually go within the next few days.
Manny, thank you so much for joining me today, this Jerusalem day. I appreciate your updates and insights as usual.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves and video edited by Thomas Gersh. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.